Good afternoon to you all, and welcome to this health and safety session on CDM 2015. My name is Ed Britton. I'm the Business Support Manager here at HBXL, and with me and our main presenter for this afternoon is Dave Price. Now, Dave is our health and safety consultant on Health and Safety Expert, so he provides us with all the technical information we need to make sure that we keep all the paperwork up to date and to regs. Dave is himself a consultant, CITB accredited, and a NEBOSH accredited construction certificate trainer. Okay, so this afternoon Dave's going to run through CDM 2015 and its impact on you as builders. As we're running through this afternoon, if you want to, you're welcome to ask questions as we go. I will field some of those to Dave as we run through, and the ones that we don't field during the session we'll pick up at the end. So we will have a little bit of a Q&A session at the end of this. Okay, so with that, over to you, Dave.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I thought it would be a good idea really to look back over the past 12 months and just remind ourselves what essentially changed, or what has changed. If you remember, we had a redefinition of duty holders, more of which later. The threshold for notifying a project was quite substantially changed. It's now a requirement, a legal requirement for all projects to have in place some kind of construction phase plan, although it's not necessary to make this a very complex piece of paper. And they talk about proportionality. So you could, in some instances, again, we'll talk about this later, have a fairly simple plan for what the HSE describe as small projects. You probably also remember that domestic clients under the old regs had an exemption. Well, no such exemption now exists, and domestic clients now do have duties under CDM 15. These duties, consequently, will be undertaken by one of the following: the contractor, the principal contractor, or the principal designer. The principal designer and principal contractor need only be appointed if there is more than one contractor engaged on the project. Moving on now towards the completion of the project, we now only need to complete the health and safety file if there is more than one contractor engaged on the project. And there's now specific information in the new regs to consult and engage with workers about the risks and how they're being managed. So that's again a little summary for you of how things changed. So just to run through for you now the duty holders. These are people under CDM 15 who have duties. A client, a domestic client, a designer. I'll elaborate and expand on these more as we go through. A principal designer and a principal contractor. These are all current duty holders under CDM 15. As our contractors and workers now are specifically mentioned as a category. Well, a good thing too, because after all, these are the minimum who are carrying out the job on the front line. So they should really be mentioned in any kind of regulation of that industry. If I can first of all just run you through the client's duties, and again, I'm not sure, I'm assuming that I'm talking mainly to the builders. So for me to go through these client duties, just try and envisage that if this is a domestic client that I'm talking about now, then these are the duties that will be 9 times out of 10 undertaken by you as the contractor or principal contractor. So, although these relate to the client, equally they could and should relate to you. So they talk about management. Make arrangements for managing the project. And then they elaborate on that, the regs elaborate on that, and they say, so that, so far as we can reasonably practicably predict, the project will be carried out without any adverse risks to health and safety by any person working on the project. So risk reduction, elimination, minimization. The client has to appoint other duty holders, and the client has to afford sufficient time and resources for the project to be carried out safely. Sufficient time, well, that's probably self-explanatory. Resources, essentially resources for health and safety. It's a duty to make sure that before the construction phase begins, that a construction phase plan has been drawn up. Not 3 weeks after commencement, but before the construction phase begins. Again, just to refresh, it's the client's duty, but it will fall, as I say, 9 times out of 10 on the contractor. Also, to make sure that pre-construction information is prepared and provided to other duty holders. Things that other duty holders may want to know. Things like, is there any residual nasty on site, like maybe oil contamination, or maybe there's an issue with asbestos. Anything that is likely and is known about pre-construction to affect the safety, future safety of the project. And that the principal designer and principal contractor carry out their duties. So these are all client's duties, as I say, to be undertaken in the case of a domestic client by the contractor. You might look at this and say, well, that's very unusual for there to be any kind of duty on a client in respect of welfare. But enshrined in these new regs now is this duty for the client to make sure that welfare facilities are provided on site before any construction work takes place. Now, the client doesn't have to provide, doesn't have to make that provision, but there is a duty on the client to ensure, to make sure that such facilities are provided. We're talking about things like canteens, toilets, running hot and cold water, somewhere to heat food, somewhere to eat food, and that kind of thing. And again, somewhat surprisingly, you'll find a difference here from the old regs. It is now the client's duty to make the notification. This is on the form F10, which you'll be familiar with. If the project is notifiable, and I'll talk about that a bit later, then the client's duty is to make that notification. And I don't want to keep repeating this, but if this is a domestic client, then this duty now falls to the contractor. And that is a fair deviation from the old regime where the CDM coordinator had that duty. There is now no CDM coordinator in these new regs, so that just about concludes the client's duties. Now if you move on, where the client is a domestic client, the duties must be carried out by, and I touched on this earlier, the contractor, where there's only one contractor involved, or the principal contractor for a project where there's more than one contractor, or with a written agreement, the principal designer can take on these domestic client duties. But they will and must be taken on by one of these categories. Now, if your client doesn't make these, appointments, then the designer in control of the pre-construction phase of the project would automatically become the principal designer, and the contractor in control of the construction phase would become the principal contractor. But I can't see any great difficulty in the client making those appointments to people, obviously, who are quite comfortable in taking on those kind of duties. So that's really come to the end of the client's duties, or if you like, the contractors or principal contractors or PD's duties. One or two of the designer's duties. The requirement now for this risk elimination really to take place in the design stage of the project or the job. Elimination. If you can't eliminate the risk, then reduce it as far as you can to the lowest possible level. Maintenance and cleaning the structure when it's finished. Designers now should be designing in, for example, if there's an issue in cleaning or servicing items on the top of a roof, a high roof, then the onus is now on the designer to design in some kind of person-safe system for carrying out that work. Not just, say, leaving a piece of equipment up there that needs an annual service and not coming to terms with how the company should and could service that. How to clean the structure, or if there are windows involved, could the designer design in some kind of window that inverts on itself, so you clean the inside and then turn that and that becomes the outside, etc. Are there things that the designer can do to eliminate and reduce risks? To be honest, there's no massive change in this from the old regs. There was always a responsibility on the part of designers to do this, but I think now the new regs have kind of placed a greater emphasis on this aspect. Designing out risks, designing out hazards, making life for the contractor or the principal contractor easier in respect of getting the place built. You could say an important role in influencing how risks to health and safety should be managed and incorporated into the design and the wider management of the project. Decisions made pre-construction phase can have a significant effect on whether the project is delivered in a way that secures health and safety. And I think a good example of this would be in terms of asbestos removal, where there is a known potential presence of asbestos, and getting that out and making arrangements for that to be disposed of safely would contribute greatly to the general health and safety of the project. The designer is essentially a coordinator, coordinating the work of contractors, the principal contractor, assisting the client, and generally sort of welding the project team together. Now that the target audience for this broadcast is probably likely to be in this area.
I think this is most of the folks I can see on the screen here.
Okay. Well, let me maybe spend a little bit more time on this. Obviously, you have a duty under the new regs to make clients aware of their duties. Now, you can only do that really if you know what their duties are. I know it's a blinding glimpse of a statement of the obvious. So, obviously, a good idea for you just to have a retake on what the client's duties actually are. Okay.
And so you were saying earlier on that the CITB now has a client duties document.
I do. The CITB have issued tailored guidance. The last time I looked, it was running at about 15 pages. Tailored guidance for clients, which includes domestic clients. It's a free download. If you want to have a look at that, it's on the Construction Industry Training Board website. And a couple of good things about it. It's quite explicit and it's free. Can't be bad. Just running on down the list or the line here. Planning, managing and monitoring your work. Now, I know you do this almost probably as a kind of a reflex. Planning, which should come naturally. How do you manage? Presumably you have a management structure on your projects and jobs. And how do you monitor? Well, I suppose you visit and have a look and see how the work is going on. The construction phase plan yet, apart from very briefly, but obviously that document is to be adhered to. So when you draw this document up, you need to be sticking with it and being compliant with it. What a construction phase plan. there are two levels, more of which later. One is a fairly complex, I think you could say it's fairly complex, couldn't you? A fairly complex document, but there is scope for on smaller jobs, and more of which later, where you can utilise a fairly succinct plan. And again, the last time I looked, it was probably a couple of pages of A4.
Yes, the HSE have put one on their website which they use as guidance, which is about a 2 or 3 pager.
Okay.
And in theory, you could actually end up making a 1-page document for very small jobs. But obviously it's for lighter work, which I'm going to touch on later on.
Okay. Well worth a visit there if you are doing a job where you think the smaller plan might be of use to you. And again, it is a free download, so very worthwhile, getting your hands on it, I would say. And then, not to minimise this, but people that you employ as contractors, should be skillful, knowledgeable, trained, and experienced. I know that's a big ask, but that's what the industry is asking. And the industry being so highly regulated, obviously that goes and travels down to the people in the front line, if you like, actually doing the work. You have a duty to train your workers, and I'm sure you do that, and this would cover things like working at height training in changing abrasive wheels, training in confined space work.
And also young workers for trainees and apprentices.
Very much so. If you could, people that are under the age of 18 years do require some kind of specialist training. And I know that if in the software that HBXL produce, there is actually a risk assessment in there for employing and utilising people under the age of 18.
Yes, it's a young workers risk assessment.
Okay. You need to provide some supervision. You can't. Well, you could, but the HSE wouldn't like it. You can't turn half a dozen people onto a site without somebody being in charge of them. So that's mentioned in the regs, providing some kind of supervision. And again, you need to give people information and instructions, probably things like toolbox talks, the odd toolbox talk now and again, site inductions and that kind of thing. Also mentioned, and very few people actually are aware of where this comes from, but it comes from the CDM regs, preventing unauthorised access to your sites. I know you'll be familiar with the Harris fencing and the minimum height of it, and the fact that the mesh shouldn't exceed so many millimetres, etc., to keep the kids from climbing it. But that is mentioned specifically in the CDM regs part 4, how to keep unauthorised people out of your site. And also, I touched on it earlier, providing welfare. Basically, we're looking at some place of shelter, somewhere that has seats in it and not benches. They say now construction workers need to have back support, somewhere to heat food, somewhere to eat food. It should be light, it should be ventilated, in the dry, it should have running hot and cold water, if that's reasonably practicable, and it should have a means of, as I said earlier, heating food. So providing your welfare facilities, those are the things you need to be focusing on. And to be honest, there isn't a lot of difference in that you see before you now compared to the old regs. It's fairly standard stuff, really. So there you are, just to reiterate, if you are working for a domestic client, and this is someone who is having work done on his or her private house where there's no business involved, it's a solely domestic client contract, then you need to carry out the duties that I've just mentioned, but also under Regulation 7, the duties of the client are transferred, the domestic client are transferred probably to you, could be to the principal designer, but I'm thinking 9 times out of 10 it's going to be yourselves.
Yeah, I would say in conversations I've had with customers where that's been involved, I've only ever heard of the contractor taking those duties. That seems to be part of the course.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Maybe I should have said 99 times out of 100 there. Okay. Fair comment. And then, if you find yourselves, if you elect to be the principal contractor, and this role only applies if there's more than one contractor. Obviously, if the whole project or job entails just one contractor, then there is no appointment of the principal. But if there are 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 contractors working on a project, the client has to make this appointment, which is the appointment of the principal contractor or PC. And if you are in this operating this role, these are your duties. And a lot of them, because you are still a contractor here, you're still a contractor, but you are the principal, a lot of these will duplicate from the contractor's duties. And I'm not going to go into these and reiterate them for you. I'm sure you can work out these are exactly the same, the first 4 at least, or possibly not that one. You probably need to think about site inductions as a principal contractor. And you need to think about liaising with the PD. There are a few more. Again, if you're working for a domestic client, you take on his or her duties. So still nailing or trying to nail down the duty holders. Hopefully, I've done that for you now. I mentioned right at the start that the threshold for a project changed in regards to it becoming notifiable. So you have to try and get your head around this new, these new criteria for notifying. Now, we notify on a form, it's called an F10. I'm sure you know the F10. That's not changed. The F10 is still in evidence, but it is now notifiable, and this basically is it, and it is substantially different. If the project lasts longer than 30 working days and has more than 20 workers simultaneously, that is in its own right notifiable, or, and there's a definite or here, if that project exceeds 500 person days, and a person day is said to be of 8 hours duration. So if either of those 2 thresholds are breached, then you have to notify that project to the HSE. A lot of people say to me, well, how do I know? How do I know it's going to last more than 30 working days? Well, supposing I get to day 10 and it's getting behind and I haven't notified it. Well, I think you'd find the HSE fairly sympathetic if you were upfront about that and you rang them on day 10 and said, look, I think I've undercooked this a bit. And they would take a late notification. Better, I think, to do that than wing it and hope that it didn't go over, and it did. And then, your HSE inspector's passing the site, and he's made a mental note that it's been running for like 6 weeks, and goes and looks in the office and says, they didn't notify that. So I would say, if in doubt, notify. Notification is just a threshold for notification. There's nothing else. It doesn't incur any further duty on you at all. It just means that you have to notify it.
And the fundamental difference between this and CDM 2007 is that there's no longer a difference between a domestic and a commercial job as far as notification is concerned. Whether it's domestic or it's commercial, it's notifiable under these guidelines.
That's a good point, Ed, yeah. All projects that meet the criteria that you now see on the screen before you are notifiable irrespective of whether they are domestic or not. Yeah, good point. So yeah, just to reiterate, it is just a threshold for notifiability. It doesn't, I hate to mention the old regs because it kind of stirs up and confuses thought some of the time. But if you remember back in the old days, or a year ago, if you like, then if if you were not notifying, then you didn't have to produce a plan, okay? But that's now gone out of the window. Notifiability is just a threshold just to do that. A little bit about three documents: pre-construction information, the construction phase plan, and the file, in some kind of chronological sequence for you. This information used to be called the pre-construction information pack. I don't know how good your memory is. Now they just call it pre-construction information, and the client has this duty to provide this information to people who want to know about it, like the designer or the principal designer or the contractor and principal. Things like oil in the ground, contaminated land, asbestos, overhead power lines, underground power cables, anything that, you know, with reasonable assessment, you could get this information and pass it on to these people. Pre-construction information. Of the health and safety file, which was produced as a result of an earlier construction project, where you would consult that, at least the principal designer would consult that to see if there are any issues in terms of dismantling the structure, any structural drawings that might assist you in taking the place down or adapting it.
A good question from Richard, actually, which is how important is it to document the pre-construction information for smaller jobs? Smaller job, we'll be talking about a kitchen extension, maybe something like a kitchen extension. Well, I think what you have to look at is the type of thing that you need to have in there. So if you're building that kitchen, it's a small kitchen extension. If you're building that over a gas main, existing sewers or whatever, then I think it'd be important to get that written down. But it may not be very much information. You know, there may be a power line over the back of somebody's house that you would need to get that documented. Absolutely. The pre-construction information will generally scale with the size of the job. For a small job, there won't be too much information that's required. For a large-scale job, if it's on an industrial site, etc., then the scale of information required for that will become proportionally larger. If that word again.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't think the HSE, contrary probably to what a lot of people think, have not put these new regs out to churn out paper, you know, to make life hard for you people. So I would say, you know, big job, big-ish pre-construction information, get it written down. Smaller job, smaller information, but still write it down.
Absolutely.
Okay. Pre-construction information. So there are people who need to know about this, and basically there'll be people like the contractor, the principal contractor, or the principal designer will need to have this information. If you write it down, then it's unequivocal. There can't be any doubt that it's been written down and handed over. If you keep it in your head and talk about it, then there's always an issue. Well, did he tell me that? Did she tell me that? Write it down and hand it over formally. Second document is the construction phase plan. Now, there's a massive difference here compared to the old regs. This now is required for all projects. And what you're doing really is just recording the health and safety arrangements that you're making. Stick in there the site rules, put in there how you're going to manage the job, what are the major risks, this kind of thing. It's a working document, and the clue is in the title, the construction phase plan, construction phase. So this is the document that's going to get you, as contractors, safely through the construction phase. Please keep it relevant. Again, the HSE don't want to see masses of pages of A4, one after the other. Make it relevant to the project. Give it sufficient detail to set out your site rule, I think that would be a good thing to get in there. And anything that you need to get in there about risks. Things like your traffic plan, your emergency arrangements. What are you going to do if there's a fire on site? Fire plan. If you're working near water, how are you going to deal with it? Stick it into the construction phase plan. But I'll go back to the kitchen extension, single story again. It's unlikely, that you'll need one of the complex plans, one of the full plans for a one-story kitchen extension. So I commend to you all, visiting the HSE website, there is a template, and I reckon it's a couple of slides, for non-complex projects. And use that, and basically all that will be in there will be the risks that you envisage encountering in this project, and what you're going to do to eliminate them, reduce them, make them reduce them to the lowest possible level. Okay.
Just to give those of you who've got our health and safety expert, the health and safety expert 2016 is coming out in the next couple of weeks. We've actually incorporated our own version of the simple plan into that, so you've got a quick one that you can fill in in the software, or you can actually just print out a blank document that can be filled in on site. One of the areas that it could be used for is doing things like small maintenance jobs, because even those are considered as a project by the HSE. So every job, no matter how small, is considered as a project as regards a construction phase plan, but it doesn't need a 10-page document to rehang a door. It's a simple one-pager will do the job.
Thanks, Ed. I mentioned earlier that if your project or the job you're doing involves more than one contractor, then the principal contractor must take the lead for the production of this document. It's kind of obvious, but it probably needs to be said in any event. If you are the only contractor working, then obviously that job will fall to you. Okay. So for single contractor projects, the contractor must take the responsibility.
Yeah. But just a quick question there from Kareem, which is, what size of works do not require a plan? The answer is all works, according to HSE, require a construction phase plan of some sort. So even a tiny one, such as fitting a new door handle, technically is still a job. It's quite contentious, not a lot of people like it, but that is the HSE guideline.
Could I just say that I do meet with HSE inspectors from time to time, and I know that they would be horrified if they were thinking that somebody would be producing 7, 8, and 9 pages for fitting a door handle. So, keep it short and keep it sweet. Address the main risks. Basically, if you haven't got any risks in the job, mention them and say there isn't any risk. But don't write 10 pages on nothing.
Yeah, quite often the construction phase plan can actually just state that there are no risks, or that the risks are minimal, and there's nothing wrong with stating there is no risk, because you have documented that you've assessed the risks and there are no risks. That is perfectly acceptable.
Fair comment, yeah.
Good question from Trevor there, which is, what is the definition of a contractor? One person or a contracting company?
Well, there isn't a definition as such, but a self-employed person is a contractor. Yep. And that's the answer, really. So
it's one person upwards. So if you had a small, say you were building an extension, you had 3 or 4 of your own guys on there, but you were going to have a plumber come on site and an electrician come on site, then they would count as contractors. So you would then move from being a contractor to a principal contractor, because you will be managing third parties.
Quite right. Okay.
David, the threshold for a plan to move from a simple plan to a large plan, a little bit finger in the air, to be honest with you. The HSE have actually put some guidance on their website. I think, is it CIS 80?
Yeah, it sounds familiar.
Yeah, there's the health and safety simple plan that's on the HSE website. They have actually put some guidance alongside with what they define as a small plan, and they're talking about things which are fairly simple. You know, maintenance jobs, obviously, in the main, and also things like maybe a small extension. What you do need to bear in mind, though, is that sometimes the risks are not always proportionate to the size of the job. You could be doing a very small job, but you might be at the top of a 10-story high scaffold, in which case that would be a very high risk. And so in that case, a simple plan may not actually suffice. So it's the amount of risks that also need to be taken into account.
Yeah, I think the size of the risks as opposed to the length of the project.
Yeah,
the size of the project.
It's a combination of the two, quite often.
Okay, yeah, good point there. Okay.
Trevor, yes, if you are the contractor and everybody who is on site is employed by your company, then you are a single contractor, correct?
Absolutely right, yes, yeah. Okay, so we're picking our way through these three documents, the pre-construction information, the construction phase plan. Can we move on now to the health and safety file? And this is the document, and to be honest, it was always there under the old regs, but it is the file that is handed over to the client basically on completion of the project. The slight change now is that you only need to complete this for projects involving more than one contractor. And I have to say that's probably going to be 9 out of 10 or 99 out of 100. So we do need to know a bit about the health and safety file. Are bits of information that the client needs to know about maintenance work on the building that you've just built for him or her. Maintenance, cleaning windows, doing repair work, any kind of refurbishing, and any future demolition. Anything of that nature. Maintenance manuals on central heating, on I'm just thinking lifts, anything to do with servicing a lift, anything to do with air conditioning, that kind of thing goes into the health and safety file.
Yeah, I recently had a new boiler fitted, and what was noticeable was the amount of documentation that was supplied to me by the installation company regarding all the ongoing maintenance.
You mean it wasn't enough?
There's quite a lot.
Okay. Well, that's your health and safety file. So those are the three documents that you need to be concerned with. There shouldn't be any great demons in there for you, to be honest. As long as you kind of just, I think, proportionality is the thing. Don't write a Tolstoy if you're building a little utility room. Just keep it brief. This document should be passed to the client, and it would normally be the PD, the principal designer, who passes that on. But if the PD is not with the project towards the end, then the principal contractor or people like yourselves would hand this document over. And to be honest, you are the people who would know mainly what needs to be handed over anyway. Reiterate, there's only a requirement to appoint a principal designer and a principal contractor if there is more than one contractor involved in the project. Yeah, I've said this before, but just to kind of square that off for you.
So Herbie, I hope that answers your question from earlier about does it have to be a principal designer to do the pre-construction plan? If there is only one contractor, then it would just be the designer.
Yes. Yeah. The appointments they should be made as soon as the client can make them, but they must be made before the construction phase of the project begins. If the client doesn't appoint, then he or she must fulfill these duties, but there are issues here, because I'm thinking to myself, if this client happens to be a domestic client, there's a question of lack of expertise. Not exclusively. So, in my view, it would be very, very unlikely for a domestic client to be able to carry out these duties on account of competence, in effect. But that's what the regs say.
Yeah, Ben's question is, what if the client is also the principal designer, in which case they would be competent?
Absolutely right. Yes, no, there's no issue with that at all. In fact, it is feasible for the client, and if they're doing design and build, the designer and the contractor to be the same person.
Certainly, yes.
Could well be. So they're not mutually exclusive. I think that's the expression. But yes, absolutely right.
I think I'd say in the example you've stated there, Ben, where the client is the principal designer, I would say that 99% of the time that would be a professional. It would be very unusual for a domestic client to be a principal designer, though of course it could well be that it is actually an architect.
That's what he does for a living.
Yeah, who has got to construct his new grand design house that he's building for himself. So that is still feasible. Again, it's down to competence there. If your client is a solicitor or works in a shop or something like that, then they're probably not competent to be a principal designer.
Well said, Ed. Thank you. So, in terms of the designer's duties, these new regs set out kind of a hierarchy, I suppose you'd call it. So, what's at the top is the best, and then what's at the bottom is not so good. So, the general principles of prevention would be avoid risks. Don't put the risk in. Don't design it in if you can avoid it. Make some kind of evaluation, risk reduction, risk combating. Adapt work to the individual. If you're designing a workplace, design in the right work equipment. Design in the right production methods. Technology, design it in. If you're building something with an industrial roof, I know nets aren't that technically recent. We've had nets for a long time, but things, we have harnesses, we have crash decking, we have inflatable fall breakers, we have fall things that will reduce the effect of a fall by putting expanded polystyrene in. Technical progress. Use it. Replace the dangerous by the non-dangerous, and just try and get things on a big, risk reduction as far as you can. If you can give collective measures priority over individual measures, then do that. A net or some kind of beanbag system or airbag system is infinitely better than harness. You can't always put them in place, but harness relies on somebody to be able to know how to use it, fit it properly, and to hook it on. Whereas if you stick a net up, or you put one of these other devices down, then it's collective, and they call that passive protective measures as opposed to active, which would be your harness. And if people need advice and instruction in terms of risk combating risks, then tell them. And the ultimate little tool there is your toolbox talk. 10 minutes on doing the job safely. The other thing that came out of these regs, and I'll let you have a look at them. I'm not going to run through them one at a time, but to give you some idea. So it's based basically on the traffic light system. So anything that's on the red list, then anything that's designed in on the red list would be thought to be not good. So just think about this, and I'll pick one or two out. Second one down, scabbling by hand the stop ends on concrete, in other words, taking the concrete off steels, where you've got steel erection taking place. Massive risk there of hand-arm vibration issues. So, use a machine to do that. Fragile roof lights on and in roofing assemblies. You can design in a structure that is said to withstand the weight of a person. So why not design in things like that? as opposed to these fragile structures. So anything that's on the red list, don't do it. You can download these RAG lists from the HSE's website. I'm not going to go through them all, but I'm sure you get the idea. Okay, so these are things to be avoided if we can. Okay. Now, anything on the amber list is, well, it's not as bad, but it could be better. So, just pick one out here. A site. And I know what you're thinking. Well, you're thinking, well, we can't always allow adequate room for delivery. But, you know, if you can, a site that doesn't allow adequate room for delivery and storage. So if you can design something better than that then do it.
Obviously, with these being amber, these are areas where it can't always be followed. And obviously the idea is to attempt to design these risks out if possible.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, it's not always possible, which is why they're on the amber list.
Very much so. Try to do better if you can, but if you can't, then we'll have to run with it. And then things on the green list, and again, I'll pick one or two out. Good at site access. Minimize reversing where you can. Use a one-way system where you can. You may not be able to do it. But if you can, do it. If you can treat timber, we're off the third one from the bottom now, off-site timber treatment. If you can carry that out off-site, then it makes your site a lot safer. Thoughtfully locate your mechanical and electrical equipment, your light fittings. Place noisy generators, for instance, away from areas where there's going to be a big potential gathering of people. Use acoustic screens where you can, and that kind of thing. So there's a quick summary of the RAG system for you. I'm going to leave it there. Apart from this one, just to say, there's a massive drive by the HSE at the moment on the use. If you have any type of temporary works, scaffolding, so any kind of shuttering, any kind of temporary works, you must appoint a temporary works coordinator. HSE is very keen on this at the moment. I'm just thinking about the software, Ed, and I have a feeling that there may be something in the software about that mentions that.
I think it's within the scaffolding documentation.
Could be, yeah. Okay. So just to not move on before mentioning that one for you. Okay. Well, transitional is finished now. We are out of the transitional period, so I can skate over that for you. So I'll put these penalties up for you, and then you come back with some questions, maybe.
There's a few questions building up.
Right, let's do it. Let's do it.
Don't worry, folks.
Let's get rid of that off there. Okay, let's do the scenarios now.
Okay, I'm going to whiz through a few here. Okay, so Richard, going back to your question, the key point about contractors is whether they are employed by you or not. Essentially, that it is if somebody is employed by you, then they are one of your people. If someone comes in who is not employed by you, then they are a third party, therefore a contractor. Okay. David, will the presentation be available after the webinar? Yes, we've recorded it. Karine, how do we think the CITB CDM wizard compares to the HSE simple construction phase plan? Essentially, they're based on the same thing. The HSE actually take guidance from the CITB on a lot of this. And the CITB little wizard that we've seen is quite similar to the HSE's one, and the one that we put in the software is also a very similar format. So they're all fairly similar.
That looks interesting.
Do we need to get in writing from the client that we're taking on their duties as a principal contractor?
I would advise a strong yes there to get that written down. And Trevor's having a good day here, isn't he? There's another quite meaty one there. How do we determine whether it is practicable to carry out certain duties? The thing about practicability, it's reasonably practicable, is we have to do a little equation to say, to look at the risk on the one hand and the cost on the other. So if we're talking about welfare, and I would say if you had to run a for a 2-week job, you had to run a water pipe in 100 meters to get the water running. I would say, as long as you had a potable drinking supply on site, then the HSE would deem that to be reasonably practicable, rather than running a 100-meter cold water service into your site that was going to run for 2 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, the HSE do understand at the end of the day that there is a point where costs can become exponential for you to supply some of these things, and it's not reasonable to do so prior to, say, the main services being linked into the site.
Very much so.
There's a good one here from Dean. Sometimes we get clients who will get their own electrician or plumber on site, so who becomes responsible for who? Good question. So,
okay.
so the client is providing a third-party contractor.
Okay. Well, somebody at some point has to, in that scenario, because that site is running under the guise of a principal contractor, I'm thinking.
Yeah.
And anything that happens on that site then falls under the wing of the principal contractor. So if you are the principal contractor and the client gets this person in, he or she, that person who's got in, must be compliant and must carry out your wishes and your will and comply with your site rules.
Yeah, because even though the client may be employing that person direct, if you are the contractor on site and you are responsible for health and safety, they then have to comply with your rules. Therefore, they do become a third-party contractor, so you become elevated to a principal contractor. Who's paying them, as far as the HSE is concerned, isn't relevant. It's the fact that they're not employed directly by you makes them a third party.
Absolutely. Herbie, yes. Herbie, can a client be a PD and a PC? Answer, yes, provided he or she is competent. Yeah.
Yeah. So, a good question actually. Who is telling clients that they have the responsibility or duty? However, the type of client who uses a non-responsible builder won't be told about that duty. That's right, Trevor, but it's up to you to notify a domestic client that they have responsibilities, but in actual fact you'll be taking most of them on board for them. If your client is a non-domestic one, then again you may have to notify them that they have certain client responsibilities if they are unaware. Unfortunately, most people don't wake up in the morning and read the HSE website to know what their responsibilities are. So it is a potential issue in the industry that, as you say, there are some builders who won't actually correctly notify their client of their responsibilities, and they will take the risk on it. If they do get caught out by the HSE, those are the ones who then suffer the large fines.
Speaking of which, I haven't mentioned this, but penalties for non-compliance actually they look formidable here. Can we say that on a fee for intervention basis now, if the HSE discover that you're not doing something in the right manner, and they need to write you a letter about it, they will or can issue an invoice to you at the rate of £124 an hour. And the last time I checked this, they had brought in something like £2.3 million between its inception in 2013 and October last year. So it's a good idea to get things right, really. That's what I'm saying. And the fines obviously speak for themselves, but this is the insidious one here, where there's no court involved in this. If the HSE write you a letter because you've failed to carry out some duty in any regulation, then that is their admin charge, £124 an hour.
Yeah, and they're a bit like HM Customs. They are the law on this. You can't challenge it.
No.
Interlude. So, Trevor, just going back to your question there. So, is the builder responsible or the client ultimately? Well, I believe that if it's a domestic client, the builder is therefore responsible for making the domestic client aware of their responsibilities.
Yes, that's so, Trevor. It's a statutory arrangement that's built into the regs that the client will hand that over to the builder. So obviously, you know, the builder needs to be pretty sharp on that and needs to get himself knowledgeable in that regard. But yes, a statutory arrangement, that means it's legally binding. Yes.
Yeah. Regarding the HSE notifying everybody, they're not the best at doing it, unfortunately, on the rules.
No, I mean, it's difficult to try and observe things coming out of the HSE. What I would say is, if you have a genuine doubt about whether you should be doing something or not doing something, or whether it should be a short plan or a lengthy plan, then I would say, you know, ring their help desk, and at least then, you know, you've tried to settle a thing in your own mind. And you know, you should find them helpful.
I've actually spoken to the HSE help desk myself on several occasions. Sometimes just on behalf of builders, and sometimes just to satisfy myself with certain questions. I have to say they're actually quite helpful. If they don't know the answer, they will actually find out and endeavour and come back to you. One thing I would say with that is that if you do take advice from the HSE help desk, do remember to document who you spoke to and when. Should their advice be contrary to what somebody else believes. Because if they've advised you on the help desk, then you can take that as official HSE advice. Do make sure you document that.
I think the documentation point is a good one to make it. Yeah, definitely.
So Herbie's question, are the legal qualifications required to carry the main roles and also to complete the pre-construction phase plan and the construction phase plan and the health and safety file? I believe the term is competence.
The term is competence, and I suppose you could kind of instance it or example it by saying, if we're talking, which are we talking about, the designer or the?
Well, so for the pre-construction, the pre-construction phase plan can be created by a designer, or it could also be someone like a structural engineer as well. Yeah. But it would generally be someone who is professionally competent.
Somebody then who's got qualifications in the build sphere or demolition in that way, and somebody who has a health and safety qualification. And the one that seems to spring up more often than not is the NEBOSH, the National Examining Board for Occupational Safety and Health, the NEBOSH construction certificate. So a combination of building skills and health and safety skills.
Yeah. At the same time, you could have no health and safety qualifications, but still competently produce a health and safety construction plan, a construction phase plan, because whilst the health and safety qualifications or knowledge certainly help, as long as you know how to produce a plan, then you can do so with your building knowledge. For those of you who've got a health and safety expert, there's a construction phase plan in there, which basically is a questionnaire, which will ask you questions. So even if you don't know how to make the plan, it will make it for you, because all the questions in there, you only need to be a competent builder to be able to answer.
Yeah, that's a fair comment. On the other hand, if you are in the business of making an appointment, then I would say, you know, you ought to be looking at the professional qualification side of it.
Yeah, certainly some of the health and safety management qualifications.
Sure, yes. Trevor's put an interesting one at the bottom. Frustrating as we are trying to do everything properly, but up against most other builders who know nothing of CDM 2015. This is the question of the playing field being unlevel for some builders who are trying to get it right and invoking good health and safety practices vis-a-vis the ones who are carrying on regardless, who are obviously getting the job done cheaper. And so Trevor is saying this makes us more professional but more expensive. That is true, Trevor, but there are some clients now who, where the reverse is true, if you can't demonstrate health and safety prowess, then you can't get on a tender list. But I know it's probably swings and roundabouts, and I do feel your frustration with you.
What I would say there, Trevor, is that because I regularly have this conversation with a lot of our customers, and some of the customers who, you know, they've got all our software and they use health and safety extensively, they actually use the health and safety documentation as part of their sales process. So you may come across a client who, prior to talking to you, is ignorant of the facts. Once you've actually spoken to them about, you'll obviously be preparing an estimate for them and talking about the build, but you'll also maybe take that as an opportunity to explain a bit more about health and safety and their responsibilities, your responsibilities, and also what, if it's a domestic client, what you will be doing for them and taking that on board. So you can actually use that as a positive against where you do have the cheaper builder who knows little about health and safety. At the same time, it is definitely an industry problem. It's one that the HSE are trying to address by doing their spot inspections on small sites. It's really, most of their targeting these days is small construction sites, because that's where most of this kind of thing occurs, where people don't take their health and safety seriously enough. You could also adopt them in as well if you know someone's if you know that someone is acting in an untoward fashion regarding their health and safety.
Yes, there is an anonymous HSE line, yeah, a bit like Crime Stoppers, but that's a matter for individuals to choose to do or not, or choose not to do.
David's asked a question: if there is a principal designer and a principal contractor on the job, whose responsibility is it to tell the client or talk to the client about their responsibilities?
Well, that would depend on whom the client is nominated. So the client will have to say, and I get this in writing, you know, if it is to be you as the principal contractor or the contractor, to get that in writing, or if you are a designer, if you are the PD, get that in writing. But it's up to the client to make the choice. Yeah. But he's got to do it.
I think David's question is, but who's going to tell them before the client is aware that they need to do that? If there is a principal designer, would you say it was their responsibility to at least inform the client that they need to make that kind of?
Oh, absolutely so. Yes. Yeah.
So I think, David, if there is a principal designer involved, you would expect them to inform them. However, as a principal contractor, I think you would at the very least question your client and ask them if they have been made aware, or are they aware of their responsibilities. And if not, you could then maybe take that as an opportunity to bring them up to speed.
Yeah, I mean, I think the designer would probably be on the scene first, so you think it would happen there. But good idea, yeah, for the contractor just to clarify that and say, you know, you have made the handover formally.
Yeah.
Just to get that out of the way.
Kareen's question is a technical one. When's the update out? In the next few weeks. We're going to be doing some testing on it tomorrow. It's not going to be a Mac version. Okay, so likely we'll produce any software for Mac at any time in the foreseeable future. But what we have got in the new version is it will no longer require Microsoft Word. You don't have to have it. You can still create Word documents in it, but you can also create the documents directly as a PDF format and various other ones that we've put in there.
And just looking at Herbie's comment saying that he uses our programs to complete his construction phase plans. He doesn't use other paperwork because he finds that it's not very good and generic all the time. So that's reassuring.
Yeah, that's fairly true. So if the client is a developer, are they still seen as a domestic client? I think the answer there is that if the client is paying you to build his house for him to live in, then he is a domestic client. If he's paying you to build a house which he's then going to sell, then that is part of his business, and that stops being a domestic client.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, it is a little bit of a grey area. Again, it's one of those ones that if you're not quite sure, you could consult with the HSE. I believe there was at some point, I can't remember where I've seen this, there was some documentation about where under that circumstance the client would have to then take up residence for X amount of time for it to count. I've got 3 months in my head, but I'm not sure if that's actually correct.
I'm not sure about the duration, but it is a grey area, and essentially people who have houses built to sell for profit are not deemed to be. I mean, I think that's, you start from that stance, and then if things fall into place and that mellows a bit, then they may well be. But I think you start from that stance and say they're not.
So, Chris, for your person who's turning a church into the house, if he's doing that because he's then going to live in it, so it's going to be his house, he would be a domestic client. But if he's converting the church into a house for him to then sell, then he becomes a commercial client.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dean, can a domestic customer who runs their own job receive such fines? If they've taken responsibility, so if they say that they want to hold the domestic client, if they want to keep it and not hand it over to you, then they become responsible for it.
Yeah.
What I would also say is that if they have if they've taken on board their responsibilities, I would get it from them in writing to make sure that you are covered.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. That domestic client would be subjected to the full range of the full force and the weight of the law. Yeah.
Herbie, you have a client who wants to build his own house. He wants you to do the paperwork for him. Yep, that's fine.
Yeah, no worries with that.
Yeah, I mean, again, that would be a case of you advising him and providing his paperwork, and he would be taking his responsibilities though. So he would have to be named as the client and also the contractor.
Yes, I mean there is no role as far as I can see, Herbie, in respect of being the provider of paperwork. So on this project that you describe here, I have a client who wants to build his own house. So he is going to be the contractor. He's going to be the client, and he's probably going to be the designer.
Yeah.
So he has to fulfil all those duties. I'm just wondering what part you might actually be performing here, apart from being a helping hand, I guess.
Yeah, because the thing with the self-build is that if he actually does all the building himself on his own, then his actual requirements are far less under the law because he's actually taking his own risks. However, I'm going to assume daringly that even though he's self-building, that he's going to employ other people to help him. So he might employ subcontractors of various nature, in which case he becomes the principal contractor himself, even though it's a self-build.
Yes, yeah, very much so. You seem to have...
Yeah, so...
Oh, he will be paying for my time and advice. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's fine. Yes. Well, advise him well, Herbie. Advise him well. You should do that.
Yeah. What you need to find out, Herbie, from it is the main thing is he actually going to be literally self-building himself? So it's going to be him and nobody else, which would be unlikely. Or is he going to be employing other people to help him with tasks? He might take on roofers, plumbers, electricians. If that's the case, then he needs to, for that intents and purposes, be treated as a principal contractor. So you need to make him aware of his responsibility as a principal contractor.
Yes, I was just going to add a little bit to that, Herbie, and say, make sure before you enter into this that, you have explained to him that you are not his principal contractor, and try and find out if you can who's fulfilling that role for him. But yes, that should be okay.
Yes, he will be a principal contractor, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. If you are a principal contractor and you subcontract work to other contractors, do they need to have their own construction phase plan?
No, they don't, but they do need probably to have their own risk assessments.
Yeah.
And method statements.
Yeah. Because if you're the principal contractor, the construction phase plan that you've created is for the entirety of the job.
Yeah.
So you will have that as a global construction phase plan. As David said there, if you're using a third party contractor, they will need to be either qualified or have their own risk assessment. So, for example, if you employ an electrician, he'll of course be level 17 part P, am I right?
If you say so.
Yeah, part P, qualified, etc. If it's a gas fitter, then of course they'll need to have their gas safe certification, etc. Roofers will have to have their roofing cards, CSCS cards, etc. But they won't need to supply their own construction phase plan. You'll be doing that as the principal contractor.
Ben's come in at the end with a good question. what happens if they don't have their own risk assessments, your subcontractors? Well, if they don't have risk assessments, they really shouldn't be. You shouldn't really be employing them as subcontractors, because you'd have to question the competence of a subcontractor who was doing potentially hazardous work without risk assessments. So I'm not sure.
The flip side of that, it could be that actually, Ben, you will provide the risk assessments again, but you would obviously, as Dave said, you would want to be assured of their competence to perform the work. If you were sure of their competence, then you would have to make sure that the risk assessments were available for the work that they will be undertaking.
Yes, that's what practically that's what happens, Ben, and that does happen frequently. But but the competence thing could still be an issue. But yes, you'd be able to do that.
That's something we hear quite actually hears quite a lot.
I'm sure, yeah.
Yeah, because in health and safety expert, there's actually a subcontractor questionnaire which actually asks for their risk assessments, and it is something that the HSC do actually refer to, that subcontractors should, in theory, be able to supply their own risk assessments. The reality of it is quite often that subcontractors are one-man band and may well actually not be geared up for having that kind of paperwork, in which case, as a principal contractor, you'd be responsible for providing that. So Ben's question is, does that mean you're taking responsibility for their work if you trust their competency? What you're taking responsibility for as a principal contractor is their safety and their ability to work safe. And as a principal contractor, you have an overall responsibility to make sure that the site is run safely and that people do that. So that's the same as in the old days, the old CDM coordinator's responsibility, which you've now taken on board. So if you have somebody on site, you're always ultimately responsible for them working safely. As to the quality of their work, well, I suppose that's a different matter.
That's why it's always a good idea not a good idea, but essential to test for competence before you employ someone. And I'm thinking here, Ed, you have I'm pretty sure you have in your software a competence questionnaire.
Yes, there is. Yeah.
Yeah. Which should help you, Ben. And if you send this questionnaire to your contractors that you're considering employing, I think there's about 15 questions on there. And when you get that back, you should have some idea of their degree of competence. It asks questions like, do they have third-party insurance? Do they have employer's liability, etc., and that kind of thing.
In an accident book, do you need to make a note of minor cuts which a small plaster will solve the problem?
The short answer to that, Herbie, is yes. Most definitely, because we don't know where that's going to lead to. There's a possibility of infection, and it's also we need to document the fact that it happened at work. It's the Social Security regulations of 1970 something that requires you to do this. It goes back a long way, anyway. For sure.
Yeah, that's actually not in CDM. That's actually the standard.
RIDOR.
It's related to RIDOR,
RIDOR, yes. And the Social Security regs. Yeah,
obviously, if it's with RIDOR now, it's a major, that has to be reported online if it's a major injury, taking somebody off site for 7 days?
7 days, yes.
Yeah. So obviously, if it's just a cut, you just need to write down somebody cut their finger. And just a lot of it is just covering yourself, again.
Yeah. Does the site induction is a must for small domestic contracts? Is it required to be written in case of subcontracting out? Are we talking about site inductions? Site inductions are a must on all. Well, we're hanging a door. One person's hanging a door. But if we have a project where we get several contractors appearing, then you'll need to do a little site induction.
Yeah, I think that's one of the cases where defining a site. Well, if it's a 1 day job, it's fairly light duty. But if you're doing a small extension, conversion, or anything like that, so you have multiple people who will be on site for a reasonable length of time, say a week or more, then it would make you would want to do a site induction. If you've got third-party subcontractors, you would certainly want to do a site induction because you need to make them aware of the way that you work and your standards of safety. And that's quite important because ultimately, if you're responsible for the site's safety, and by responsible that also means liable, you need to make sure that you are satisfied that you've briefed these people correctly. It's no use an accident happening and you blaming them afterwards when that could have actually been averted by you just explaining certain things about the way you operate.
Yeah, well said. Absolutely right. Site inductions, yeah, to be commended. Again, they don't have to last for 2 hours.
Yeah.
Make it short and sweet, and anything that's relevant.
It's actually a brilliant way of just getting across. Treat it as a brief to these guys. It's just a good way of getting across, laying out your stall, what you expect, and it can make the difference. If you can avoid an accident, that's so much better for everybody involved. Because if you have an accident on site, there's no two ways about it. It will cost you money. Even if the smallest thing, if someone cuts their finger and they spend 10 minutes putting a plaster on it, we've lost 10 minutes of construction time. It's quite minor. But if somebody injures himself and has to go to hospital, you've then lost an employee for X amount of time until you can replace them. Plus, there's always lots of people running around wondering what's happened to cause the accident.
Oh, just one last thing, Ian. When you do these inductions, write them down. Just record them. Yeah,
in the software we've got a site induction. We also have a site induction register. Okay. Again, it's a very good thing to cover yourself legally. If you have a subcontractor who's not an employee of yours, so they're a third-party subcontractor, if you've done a site induction and you've got a register of them doing it, if something happens on site and they attempt to then blame you, and you can prove that you have covered this in a site induction and that they've signed to say they've had the site induction, again, you then passing your responsibility onto the actual worker involved, because workers cannot pass all their responsibility over to you. They are actually responsible for their own actions. A lot of health and safety is about covering yourself. In the health and safety expert, we've got a section called management documents. There's probably 25 documents in there which are, pardon the phrase, about covering your backside. An awful lot of it is just to make sure that you have people to sign off to say they have been trained or they've been issued, things have been tested, so that they cannot then come back later and say that you have not done something. A lot of it is about providing evidence should anything happen that then goes to the legal side of things.
Yeah, there's an old adage that I think holds good for the HSE. Their view is that basically, if it's not written down, then it never happened. And you may say there's a lot of cynicism in that, but obviously they get told such a lot of nonsense that really is where they're coming from there. If you've done something, then write it down and evidence it, and then you have covered yourself.
Yeah, to expand on that, probably the most common one that comes up is the use of a PPE register. For those of you who read such excellent publications as The Sun or the Star or the Daily Mirror, that kind of thing, you'll quite often see a big full-page advert of a builder holding his knee, saying, have you had an accident on site or anything like that, or have you got vibration like finger, or have you got psoriasis, then please contact us and we'll try and sue every builder you've ever worked for. If you've got PPE registers with that person's signature on to say that you've supplied them with all the correct PPE, then you can't have some lawyer try and prosecute you X years down the line to say that this person's got psoriasis because you never supplied them with the applicable gloves, for example.
Yeah, good point.
So, again, a lot of it is just about covering yourself.
Yeah, absolutely so.
I think we've beaten everyone to death. I think we've got to.
Yeah.
So, gents, that's the end of our presentation. So, what I would say is we're going to stick ourselves on mute for a minute or two. If you've got any further questions, feel free to type them on screen. If there's anything you think of overnight or in the next few days, send an email to support@hbxl.co.uk and put for the attention of Ed, that's me, okay, and I will endeavour to answer the question for you, or if it's something a bit more highbrow, I will pass it over to Dave, who will
pass it back to Ed,
who will pass it back to me to give you an answer. How long do you have to keep records for?
Well, it's a little bit of a grey area. The thing is, Ben, civil, I'm not going to get too technical about the civil law, but normally, lawsuits have to start within 3 years of the known offence, if you like. So I'd say you certainly need to keep records for 3 years. However, if you are involved in asbestos stuff, if you are, and I'm probably not applicable to you, but a licensed asbestos remover, then you would need, I'm pretty sure the duration there is 40 years.
It's some enormous amount of time, yeah.
But usually, people normally keep stuff for 3 years because that's when it's not possible to sue someone if that time has elapsed.
I think there are some caveats that allow for 5 years.
Okay.
So
perhaps we should say 5 then.
Yeah. So
to be safe.
I think that 3 years, the vast majority of it, but civil actions can take place up to 5 years afterwards, I believe, under certain. So I think if there's a civil action for an accident or very serious injury, I think it can go beyond.
I think you're probably right.
So if it was me, then I would probably keep paperwork at least 5 years. If it's anything like my receipts, I keep them for about 20 years. But I'd say I think 5 years would be reasonable.
Okay. Oh, what are the best books to buy? This is from Herbie, to help with things that we've discussed. It's a very good question.
All the downloads off the HSE website.
I think keep downloading, and I think your user manual, which they would have.
If you've got software, there's a reasonable amount of guidance in.
There is a reasonable amount of guidance. Otherwise, I mean, there are textbooks. Hughes and Ferret write but it's quite deep, and it's a NEBOSH kind of standard. I say if you want to know about welfare, for instance, minimum requirements for welfare, stick that up on the HSE website on Google, and you can then download something which I think is CIS 40. I'm not sure about the number, but you can get that document tailored to what you're actually inquiring about. So and they're free. These are free downloads. So get on the HSE website,
because they have a big section of there's H downloads, HSG downloads, L downloads, CIS downloads, and there's one more.
CIS, HSGs,
L's
and ACOPs.
Yeah. But basically all the HSE publications you can download for free as a PDF. I think some of them you can actually buy as a book as well, but why pay money?
Yeah. David's had problems receiving some of the bits of the broadcast. So I think Ed said yes, it will be.
I've recorded it, so we'll turn it into a video. And what we'll do is everyone who's registered for the webinar, we'll send you a link so that you can watch this video again with popcorn or maybe a stiff drink.
Ben, just Google on the HSE website the RAG lists, and they're up there. You'll get them. You can download them free.
Is there a book with all the regulations in? I think the answer to that is no. It isn't in one place, is it?
Wow. Well, last time I looked, Herbie, there were somewhere in the region of 80 regulations that affected construction work. And I think you probably need about 25 volumes to get that lot in. So no, you have to cherry pick and pick on the bits that you actually need. To be honest with you. So yes, there's no one big book.
It would be nice.
It would be nice. Well, it would be big.
Would it be? Yes. Okay, right. Well, I think we've got to the end of everyone's questions there. Good work there.
Just had a thought. Are we still live?
We are.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is the book that I think comes nearest to answering Herbie's wish for something that covers all the regulations. It's written by Hughes. I can't give you the ISB number, but it's written by Hughes, Hughes, and Ferret, as per Ferret. Okay, the creature, and it's construction health and safety law, and every bit of legislation that affects construction law is mentioned in there to some extent. So Hughes and Ferret, construction health and safety law. If you Google that, then you'll get it. It's pretty expensive. It costs about, I think you can get it for about 75 quid, and it's fairly digestible. And it's the one that NEBOSH, the National Examining Board for Occupational Safety and Health, used for their annual exams. That's the textbook. So good luck with that, Herbie.
Folks, well, we're going to call off today then. So thank you very much for all you have come along today. As I say, if you do have any questions later, feel free to email support@hbxl.co.uk and just put for the attention of Ed. And other than that, hopefully talk to you all soon. Thanks very much.
Good afternoon, everybody. Keep it safe. Bye-bye.